Hi, my name's Nick Buck, and I'm a volunteer docent and on the board of Skyline Farm in North Yarmouth, Maine. Skyline Farm is a 60-acre preserved farm, 95 The Lane in North Yarmouth. We have walking trails, fields. We have about 160 carriages in our collection. We have a working blacksmith shop, and we have a trades building for leather work and woodworking and wheelwork that we're getting underway. We're an all-volunteer organization, a nonprofit. Our present exhibit is the history of comfort. And this vehicle that I'm standing beside is called a New England Pleasure Wagon. And the New England Pleasure Wagon this particular one is right about 1790. I believe it came out of Maine. I purchased it in Thomaston, Maine, 10, 12 years ago. I'm not precisely sure. It's got original paint. It's got this wide black pinstriping and this lime green paint. And people say, wow, that's kind of a little bit gaudy for the period. And I always encourage them to go to the Macmillan House at Maine State Art Museum in Portland and look at some of the colors in the Macmillan House, and they'll see these bright, vivid colors that they were just common at the time. There's a few things that are interesting about this vehicle. It's got wooden axles with linch pins. It's before they had an axle nut. It's got a wrought iron whiffletree, which is the bar that the horse gets hitched to. That's pretty common in a New England pleasure wagon. The seat is removable. The reason the seat is removable is because farm wagons were not taxed. Pleasure wagons were taxed. So they would take the seat out, and it was a widely known thing. So it's, oh no, farm wagon, we're not taxing that, but everybody knew that the seat fit back in. I don't think it was you were hiding it from the tax man. He did the same thing with his. It has wooden springs on the body, and it has a wooden cantilevered spring under the seat. This long arm that I'm touching is probably not visible yet in the picture, but is the cantilever spring, and that ends up in 100 years, that wooden cantilever piece follows all through the history of this vehicle, but it's no longer a spring at the end of it. It's just this stylistic detail. It has a front board, but it doesn't have a dash. And the front of the vehicle was the real reason that the front, you have a front to a vehicle, is to keep it getting hit in the head by the rocks that are kicked up by the horse's feet, or the mud that gets packed in their feet and flies off at a trot. So you have this board, what develops into a dashboard, and you're dashing along and you're keeping the rocks out of your face. And today in a modern vehicle, we still have a dashboard, but it's not for rocks, it's for holding speedometer. And this wooden cantilever spring is what provides, comfort for the passengers. So, and this is the linchpin that would have held the wheel on, and this is before they had a nut. And the next vehicle that's just a decade or two newer has a nut. Still has a wooden axle, but it'll have a nut to hold the wheel on. And I'm just going to pull this wheel out. And this piece right here is what those those wooden molds and that bushing that I was holding in my hand earlier, that's where that fits. It gets pressed into the wheel, and it's about that wide. And there's another one that's on this side. And this one here, you can even see the little spikes that hold it in place. And of course, there was one size bushing on one side and the other side on the other side to match the taper of the axle. European buckboard, when it is really one of the first true American vehicles. This design, this bracketed design, there's a name for it that escapes me right now, but this curve, this panels, this is really, these aren't separate panels. This is 3 boards here, and they're separated by this framework. It came to the United States from Germany. This particular style of vehicle, and that it's a passenger vehicle, is truly one of the very first American designs for a vehicle. Where the real competition is in sporting vehicles. Commercial vehicles in original condition. That's where the competition is. Sporting vehicles because people want to drive, and then these commercial vehicles because it's a big part of our history. This vehicle is not, even today, you'd be hard pressed to get $1,000 for this at an auction. At some point, and I can only say this, that it happened during the 1960s because of the age of the hardware, somebody turned this and gave this a tailgate. But this didn't originally fold down. One of the things that a common misconception is that the horse-drawn era is this ancient, long ago time. During World War II, we were here in Maine, we were using horses in the fields continually. It wasn't until after World War II that really the tractor became affordable to the point where, you know, a local farmer could afford it. You know, well into the 20th century, we were working with horses, and it's just the way it is. And I like to remind people of that. So these are 2 more New England pleasure wagons. You can still see the cantilevered wood spring here. The seat still comes out for tax reasons. Still has the wrought iron whiffletree. This one has nuts on the wheels, so it goes from linchpins. It still has a wooden axle, but the wheel has a nut on it, and I explained that earlier. You'll see that when I was talking about axle pieces. This here has a steel axle now that's bound to wood. Again, decade or 2 newer. This one still has the removable seat, but now it's got this metal piece. So the spring is now not being used. That one, the first one, the green one that we were talking about, had wooden springs on the body. This one has leather springs on the body. This one has steel springs on the body. And now the steel springs offer much better springing than either the leather or the wood, so they don't need the wooden cantilever springs, but it's still part of the style. It's still part of the design of the vehicle. But they put this in now because they don't need the springing of the seat. There's no dash on this vehicle, but then now we see a dash, a board on the front of this vehicle over here to keep the debris that flies off a horse's feet from hitting the driver in the face. 1790, 1820, 1830, 1840, 1850. That's what we're, you know, and these are, you know, this isn't like model year 1839 and this is model year. I'm just ballparking this stuff. But I'm not, these aren't just like wild guesses. This is coming from a guy that's been following carriages his entire life. I'm not far off the mark here. Vehicle here is just a country gig. It's in natural wood. It's not painted, it's just natural wood. You can see the straw hat there. It's the linen shirt here. The hat, the hat's not a bad fit, little big. The color represents it's for a woman, not for a man. Summer vehicles were not painted in genteel society. So this is a summer vehicle. Instead of having a black leather dash that's patent leather, it has a russet leather dash that's not patentinated. And the dashboard is one of those things that the idea of the dashboard is move forward. You know, this was to keep whatever was being kicked up from the horse's feet off your legs or out of your face. And now we refer to the instrument panel on an automobile as the dashboard. And it's just because it's the board that's directly in front of you. And in early days, it actually was a board. This is the vehicle we're focusing on now. It's called a whalebone buggy, and it really, you know, it's a spindle seat, and these are very thin. It's got wire spoked wheels, and the whalebone really comes from the spindle seat. There are other vehicles with a spindle seat, but this particular one is what we refer to as a whalebone, just because the spindles are so thin. It's around the 1900s, but it is the vehicle that I pointed out. It's got a metal dash on it. I don't see any in here today that have wood, but if we see one, we do have vehicles in our collection that actually have a dashboard. But again, this is, to keep stuff from flying into your face or onto your body. And it's one of those things that just carries forward to the dashboards of today. Here we have a mail wagon, rural free delivery, RFD. The free part wasn't that you didn't have to pay for postage, is that it was delivered for free. It had, this door is actually on springs to keep it open, but it has, doors, you're totally enclosed. You can see here that the reins come through the little slots underneath the window, so you can, wind or sleet or snow, whatever that saying is about the mail being delivered. It's got a canvas top on it. Most of these vehicles don't have a wooden top. It's a wooden frame with canvas or painted canvas stretched over the top of it. And one thing about the mail vehicles, and I'll show you here, you can see how wobbly the wheels are. These vehicles got used perhaps more than any vehicle around. They did a really rough route, and they did it daily. The mail didn't come to your farm every day, but the mail wagon went to a farm every day. And so the mailman was, for all intents and purposes, he was the webmaster. He was the one that not only bringing the mail to you or your newspaper to you, but he was also bringing, the news from down the road. There are several times, recorded times, when children were mailed. They weren't put in a package and just stuffed in the thing, but, say, hey, well, can you take my baby, because the mailman knew everybody, can you take my baby over to Aunt Jones? And he says, I can, but I can't because, I'd have to charge you postage. Okay, what's the postage? Because they were doing this for a job. And there's another instance of a child that went, several hundred miles, and over a couple-day period, and it was just going from one place to another, and it was transported by mail wagons. So there are instances of, you could mail your kids away. So that's what I got to say about that one. It's, this one's been restored. We have a mail sleigh, same exact body, just on runners for the winter time. So what we have here is a ladies' phaeton. You know, I talk about summertime vehicles and wintertime vehicles. This is a year-round vehicle. Not everybody could afford to have summer vehicles and winter vehicles. Most people could not afford that. It's called a folding top or an auto top. It's got the folding top on it, which on a really beautiful day, you could put the top right down. You just have a better view and can see all there is to see. Some of my fondest memories are driving a top buggy when I was a kid. It's just an experience that you can't replicate in an automobile with windows. You're going along and you're in a scene, and as the scene gets to here, it disappears. So there's no, you're sitting in here, so you really have no peripheral vision. So all there is what's in front of you. To use a modern term, it just goes off screen, as you go past it. This particular shape, where it has this and comes down, is an auto top. We can go, as we go around, and I'll show you other tops. It is a folding top, but this particular shape is an auto top, and I don't see any on display here today, but we do have vehicles that have an auto top like this, and the top extends out over the second seat too. Of course, this is only a single seater, but yeah, it's a convertible. Another thing that people who haven't driven in buggies would have a hard time believing or understanding, this is more comfortable than your automobile. It's got cushioned seats. The springs are lighter than in your automobile, so you're not getting jostled like you would. The wheels are bigger around, so when you go over a bump, the wheels roll over that bump easier than the size tire on an automobile. The big wheels make it easy on the horse to pull, because when they go over an object in the road or the road, road surface is really just many, many objects laid flat. The texture of the road, whether it's a gravel road or a macadam road or a dirt road, it's got texture, which means you're rolling over stuff. The big wheels make that easier. And, driving along behind a nice 12-mile-an-hour horse, it's comfortable. It's like sitting on your living room couch going for a ride. It's more comfortable, and especially in an open buggy where you're out in the elements as well. It's an experience not to be missed. If you get the chance, take it. There's no better lesson in history than to actually experience it. And to be able to ride in a horse-drawn buggy, an actual antique vehicle, gives you a window into the past that you will not otherwise get. This is a fine piece of craftsmanship. It has a pass center mechanism that's just slightly past center, so it locks. And I don't even know if it's past center or it's just a tight mechanism where it locks. This is probably 1870s, 1880s. As you get toward the 1890s, the late 1890s and 1910s, they started introducing roller bearings, and 90% of the progress in the horse-drawn era happened in the last 25 years of the horse-drawn era. They weren't jumping as fast as we are today in technology. This was a ladies' phaeton. It was a middle-class vehicle, middle to upper-class vehicle. It could be in a coach house, and the lady of the house could tell somebody, go hitch me the horse to the phaeton, I'm going for a drive. This is not a high-style sporting park vehicle. This is just going to town to go visiting or something. This isn't even a vehicle that you go grocery shopping in. This is more of a middle class, merchant class vehicle where, you know, the wife wanted to go visit one of her friends or go to the doctor's office, something like that. This is another ladies' phaeton. The wicker, even though the vehicle's painted, this is not a wintertime vehicle at all. This is a complete summertime vehicle. Natural finished wicker. This vehicle has a groom seat. So this makes this more of a sporting vehicle. This is more of a park vehicle. When I say park vehicles, there's the leisure class of people who would, oh, I want to go, drive in the park today. And it was a place to go to be seen. And so, like I said, it's a ladies' vehicle, so they have, one or two ladies. This is called a parasol top. And then they'd have a groom. And in this particular vehicle, the brake is operated by the groom, not by the driver, but by the groom. That's not a common thing, but it's an interesting thing. It has what we call a platform spring. So there's 4 springs. There's 2 that run fore and aft, and 2 that run athwartships. And it's just more of a robust, heavier spring. These are particularly light, because it's not made for a heavy load. It is cut under, which means the wheels can turn underneath the body, but the wheels can't turn completely around because there's a rub iron. This one's called a roller rub iron under here that keeps the wheel from, scarring up the underside. This does have sometimes they call them a reach, or it's just an iron-sided wooden bar that goes from front to back. If we didn't have that, the body would have a lot more stress supporting the front and back axles. And now the body is just floating above. It's not the wheels aren't working the body as well. This is just a wicker tire cover. So when you get in the vehicle, you're not getting dirt on your skirt or your trousers. And in a vehicle like this, often enough, you'd position the wheels so you had a little bit more room to get into, and the step was here on the axle for you in order to get in the vehicle. It would be more difficult to get in the vehicle with the wheel here. And so you'd either have the groom would now be off the vehicle holding the horse to one side and letting people get in, and then he'd place this here, and then when he got in the vehicle, he'd take this and just put it under the front seat, and away you go. To me, when I say groomsman, a groom is generally a young man. He's not a coachman yet. It's sort of like if you watch Downton Abbey, you have the valet and butler, the under butler. There's a hierarchy to that. There's a tradecraft to that, if you will. So a groomsman's a young person. He's got skills because he knows how to handle a horse. He's harnessing horses. They also have to have some interpersonal skills. Something else I'll point out, that these spokes are staggered spokes, so that this spoke is offset about a ½ an inch from this spoke, which is a ½ an inch, on infinitum all the way around the wheel till you get back here. Just this tiny little bit of triangulation that makes it a sturdy wheel. And that is generally an indication of age, older vehicles, and quality. This is a nice vehicle. I don't know, this one has, this is a whip socket here. It's got this has a, getting back to dashes, this has a wicker dash. And the wicker was usually willow. It's made out of willow, and it's sized. And I'm not sure, there might be a die they pull the willow through to size it, because it is very consistent. And I'm not sure the manufacturer on this one, but it's a nice vehicle. And again, you know, you drive along in something like this, and when I go driving in my buggy, the people who can most identify with what I'm doing are motorcycle guys. And they always slow down, they get it. You know, they get the vulnerability about being out in the open, they get the idea of being out in the open. You know, that's why they're there too, because you're not encased in something, you're driving out in the open. And you know, when whenever I hear motorcycles coming, I'm more relaxed than I am when I hear an automobile coming, because in my experience, you know, almost 100% of them just get it. They're like, they slow down, they're respectful, they understand, you know, where you're coming from. So, again, it's just another nice vehicle, and again, just to reinforce it, that a natural colored vehicle is a summertime vehicle. I don't know if that's a rule, they wrote it down anywhere, but that's generally what it is. This lamp here is a candle burning lamp. They have a spring in here that pushes the candle up, so the wick stays at the same height. There's a spring in the bottom that pushes the candle up so it keeps the flame at the same height. And lamps take a certain amount of maintenance. You know, it's another job of the groomsman is to keep the lamps clean and polished. And you have an oil lamp that the wick needed to be trimmed. When I was a teenager, I was a lighthouse keeper, and the nickname for lighthouse keepers is a wickie. And because they spent a lot of time, because they had to trim the wicks. So when a candle wick is, you know, a single string that's round, you know, much like the string you know, tie a parcel together with, and a oil lamp wick is flat and wide, you know, from a 1/2 inch wide to, you know, 1.5 inches wide, depending on the size of the lamp. And if the lamp wick wasn't adjusted to the right height, the end of the wick gets charred and crunchy, and so the way an oil lamp works is that the idea is not to burn the wick, is to burn the oil on the wick, and the oil migrates up the wick just through capillary action. So as you burn it, the oil just naturally migrates up. I'm not going to get into the physics of that because I don't understand it, but that's how it works. But you had to, you know, trim the wicks and keep that, you know, even though you were burning the oil, the wicks would become unclean and burn unclean, and you had to maintain them. When I was in the Coast Guard and a lighthouse keeper, we had electric lights, but they still referred to us as wickies. So I'm not that old. What we have here is the oldest vehicle in our collection. This was built in England, 1765. This is a vehicle that we recently acquired from the Carriage Museum of America, which is, they had a certain number of vehicles, and they decided to get rid of their vehicles. And the Carriage Museum of America is generally a library now. The Carriage Museum of America and the Carriage Association of America have now combined, and the Carriage Museum of America decided to divest itself of its vehicles, or deacquisition them, as they say in the museum business. And we are the beneficiaries of several of the vehicles that they deacquisitioned. We were fortunate enough to get. And this is one of them. And it's 1765, it's called a whiskey. It's got nothing to do with Scotch. It's got everything to do with, they were the fastest vehicles on the road. And they whisked along. It's got, if you can see this accented dish to the wheel. And so the dish to the wheel is something that I get often asked about in the museum. And the idea of the dish of the wheel is when you're turning a corner, the weight of this vehicle is pushing on the hub out. And if the wheels were straight up and down and had no dish to them, the hub would come poking, just the wheel would collapse because just there's no geometry holding it together. So they put dish in the wheels to prevent that. However, it was an experimental phase. It was an experiment. And so 1765, you have to understand or believe as is in my case, because a lot of this stuff is, for me, is interpretation. I wasn't there in history, and even though I've read a lot of books on this stuff and been hanging around carriage vehicles, I'm 67 years old. I've been hanging around horse-drawn vehicles for 67 years. My father collected horse-drawn vehicles. He had about 40 of them. I have about 20 in my own collection. We have about 160 here in the museum. And there's been vehicles that have come and gone from this collection, come and gone from my own collection, and come and gone from my father's collection. And of course, I've visited, over a lifetime, I've visited collections all over the country. There's literally, it's not a stretch of the imagination to say that I've looked at 1,000 or more vehicles in my life, and perhaps double that. But back to the wheel. It is all interpretation. Why is this wheel more dish than the wheel behind it? Why does this wheel not have a staggered spoke when the wheel behind it does? Why is this wheel heavier than the wheel behind it, or heavier than the same diameter wheel beside it? And that's because this guy built it this way. And I think as the farther back in antiquity you go, as far as vehicles concerned, the greater the dish in the wheel. And I think they first built the wheels without the dish, the wheel collapsed. Then they built the wheels with a great amount of dish, and they collapsed in the other way. That wheel, the wheel on the inside of the corner, started collapsing because it had too much dish. So I think they slowly settled on the right amount of dish. And so later on in the 19th century, this is 18th century, this is 1865, so this is mid-18th century. It's over 250 years old, this vehicle. This particular vehicle, at some point, was imported into the United States in the 1770s, before the American Revolution. So, before, during, and after the American Revolution, there were ships going back and forth to Europe, leaving daily, arriving daily. And all sorts of goods and materials came from Europe here and went back. Usually raw materials went back, value-added materials came here. Who bought this to the United States, who built this in London, is all a mystery to me. This is an iron rail wrapped in flat wicker, and sometimes that was covered in leather, and other times it was not. It was just the style of that period of time. It's got a cantilevered wooden spring. There's no steel springs on this. It does have a steel axle, but it's got a cantilevered wood spring on it. And then the body is slung on leather thorough braces on that wooden spring. So again, you'd be surprised at how comfortable this is. You can see how large the wheel is, how easy it is to roll over things. And everything on this is hand forged. There's not a machine-made piece here. Everything was made in a forge and an anvil. There's some scroll work on the steps. This scroll work, you'll see a lot in early vehicles. The scroll work on that step. The dash here has been bent. This dash should be standing, vertically. It's bent. Looks like somebody put their foot through it. I just acquired a sleigh built in 1820, and I came up to this today, and I'm looking at the hand stitching in here and realizing that the dash on the sleigh that I bought recently has its original dash on it in really nice, fine condition. So I'm happy that the sleigh I have has this same wicker wrapped steel on it, which I'm really happy with, and all the ironwork on it is as well forged. So it's interesting to me that I can come in here and observe this vehicle, and it informs me about the vehicle that I just bought. I've been doing it for all these years. It's something I never lose my enthusiasm for. So again, it's the oldest vehicle in our collection. So we're really, really happy to have it. This is R.H. Palmer registered horse slaughter. He's got his telephone is Rumford 124. Okay, this is an English vehicle. It's got a telephone number for the horse slaughter. Okay, so we're talking late 19th century, early 20th century. I was doing a talk at the Owl's Head Transportation Museum on carriages. This is 20 years ago. And a man came up to me. He was an elderly man. This is 67. Some people would say I'm an elderly man. He was older than I am. But he came up to me and he said, my uncle had 600 Belgian draft horses to deliver, and they were, all of them, every one of them was contracted to deliver newspapers in New York City. So the New York Times, the New York Post, the Daily Gazette, whatever they were, they contracted with somebody to supply horses for the wagons to deliver newspapers. Now you have to remember, you had a daily, then you had an evening edition, and if there was breaking news, you had an extra edition. We didn't have the 24 news cycle. Nobody was on watching stuff on TV. We weren't listening to it on the radio. You got your news through newspapers. So if it was important, they made an extra edition. But you got the daily newspaper, then you got the evening edition. So 600 horses in New York City. Not all of those, and those horses were just, there's thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of horses in New York City. 600 were just one man contracted just to deliver newspapers. That's not saying somebody else was in contracted to deliver newspapers as well. And not all of those horses were working every day. He had a farm out in New Jersey where he retired his horses, and I'm sure he had stables and paddocks where, horses that weren't feeling good or for whatever reason weren't being used that day were cared for. So this has there's a winch mechanism that's underneath here, and it comes up, and there's another rod that fits in here, and it's got this ramp on here, and this gate can come off here. I'm not going to take the pin off on the other side, but this gate swings down and actually lifts off so they can come up to a dead horse and winch him onto the wagon. And dead horses are a fact of the horse-drawn era, like dead people are a fact of humanity. Just because a horse dies doesn't mean it was a cruel existence. I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm just saying that horses die. When I was a boy, we had horses die, and they came with a ramp truck, and they winched them on, just like these guys did. And I've I've had a horse die that I had to load into the back of my pickup truck to dispose of myself. So, and the fact that this vehicle is here being displayed in the collection, I'd fairly like to say is our effort at transparency. But it's a two-wheeled vehicle, and so the question is, why are there two-wheel vehicles? Was it an ancient thing, or was it? They're more maneuverable. They're less expensive. You can go faster. There's a myriad of reasons why to have a two-wheel vehicle and not a four-wheel vehicle. This vehicle here is late 18th century American. And this is, I'm not going to put the top down on this, but it's got the same, knuckles that do this. This has got a leather top, but it's still got these knuckles that collapse. This top can fold right down back. It's got the wooden cantilever spring. This is a whiskey. This is a one-horse chaise. A chaise is French for chair, so it's a riding chair. It's still got the wooden cantilever spring. It's got the leather thorough braces that the body is on. Leather dash. That one had a small leather dash, and it's got a painted canvas apron, a storm apron, that would come up and over your laps and drop down to the sides. There was a little button that would come over. So, and I have one of these on a vehicle that I like to drive in the shoulder seasons when it's getting cold. And I have that rain apron I put over, and I can take a wool blanket and drop it over my feet and on my lap, and then put that rain apron up. And even on a rainy day, I can drive the 4 miles to Damascotta and get groceries and be totally comfortable. You're feeling the wind on your face, and I don't do it in a driving rain, but if it's a a sprinkly day, a little bit, if it's a bracing day, I don't mind doing it. If it's blowing a gale, I'm not going to put the horse through that. It's got wide striping on the wheels, which is an indication of an 18th century vehicle. I'm told by a very experienced carriage historian that was referred to, Mary Farrell's her name, referred to as the decade of delicacy. The 18th century was not a delicate century. And these wheels, these stripes are wide, and that's, an indicator of of the age of the vehicle. Again, all hand forged, and this is even hand forged, these scrolls. So, and the scrolls might have been cast and then forged, or they might have just been forged as one piece, but the hardware on this is just exceptional and handmade. So this, even though it's 18th century, this was a vehicle for a wealthy man. It's just the common man could not have afforded this. I mean, he could have been a wealthy farmer. A lot of the wealthy people, doctors and lawyers, they were also farmers, so he could have been a wealthy farmer, but, but he was, whoever he was wealthy. There's the work on this is exceptionally fine blacksmithing. So again, it's a one-horse shay, and there's a poem out, the Deacon's one-horse shay, and it just talks about this vehicle and the different wood species to build it. The Deacon's one-horse shay is the name of the poem, so he could have been a clergyman, he could have been a doctor, he could have been a lawyer, could have been a wealthy farmer. A lot of times there'd be a two-wheeled vehicle like this in the spring of the year, and they drive a stallion to it, and they drive around the country with the stallion breeding mares. So, somebody would say, and of course that's a county-wide thing. Somebody's not going, oh, I'm going to take my stallion down to Boston and breed. He was breeding around the county, and somebody had a particularly nice stallion, and people wanted to breed to it, so he'd drive around with this and breed different mares. This is a peddler's wagon from Lee, New Hampshire. Apparently the town of Lee's Historical Society has a bunch of literature about this particular peddler's wagon. Our past historian, she searched for this vehicle for a long time because she'd read about it in the Historical Society in Lee, New Hampshire. And then the man whose collection that, Ken Souls, whose collection this museum is based on, he discovered it. And when our past historian saw the vehicle, she says, wait a minute, I've been looking for this for 20 years, and here it is. And so, you know, a peddler's wagon is that. It's a peddler's, you know, here's a mallet, there's a lamp. What do we got here? It's a turkey baster. There's a bunt pan. There's a broom. There's a little rocking chair. There's up here you got a horse anchor, buttons, a bucket mower, you know, and he would probably as well have catalogs, you know, so you could order something from him. I've seen peddler's wagons with a basket of cage underneath. And I've seen peddler's wagons, photographs of peddler's wagons with pigs in that cage, piglets and chickens. And I would not be surprised to find that he would have sacks of flour. I would not be surprised to see a peddler's wagon with fresh vegetables in the summertime. I'd not be surprised to see a peddler's wagon with fruit or live chickens tethered to the top of it. I'd be not surprised to see just about any form of barter on a peddler's wagon. You know, this peddler's wagon probably had a 50, 60 year career. It's got, on the wheels, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's tin dust covers. So dust doesn't get in the wheel. The wheel is tapered. The axle on a wheel is tapered. It's larger on the inside than it is on the outside. You don't see dust covers on the outside of a wheel. You do see dust covers on the inside of the wheel, because if the dust from the road gets to the inside of the wheel, it's going to migrate down the taper and wear the wheel out. So they put dust covers on the inside of the wheel. You don't see it on all vehicles. You do see it on big commercial vehicles that were constantly in use. This peddler's wagon, and I only know this from, and I'll talk more about that when I get to this wagon over here, but he probably had a route, you know, and probably a 2-3 week route. And it was the same route. He got to know people on his route. He didn't just head off into the outback and, you know, never return. He was a traveling salesman, and like all traveling salesmen, he had customers and he returned to those same customers. You know, in the back here, there's all sorts of things. You know, there's a brush. We got a box of, it looks like a tube for a player piano. You got a whacker for the carpet. You know, a tea kettle. There's all sorts of things. There've been scoops. So he's bringing things to the farmer and the rural people that they can't get otherwise. And he's accepting, you know, cash and barter. But the idea was that he bartered. And that's what this guy did. He went around the country bartering. And I doubt there were, everything had a price marked over what he paid for it. But I imagine there were times when he just sold things out of the goodness of his heart because people needed it. And I imagine there were times when he made a really good profit because he felt good about that too. So, and this story about Arm & Hammer was just an illustration of barter on a grand scale. So what enabled the Civil War was a machine that made horseshoes. In the late 1850s, somebody invented a machine that made horseshoes. Without that machine, the war could not have happened. You would have had too many lame horses. They could not have made by hand all the horseshoes needed. You know, if there were 1 million horses, and I think that's an underestimate of the amount of horses in the Civil War, then that was 4 million horseshoes. You change your horseshoes every 6 weeks. So think about how many years the war lasted, how many millions of horseshoes that was. So without a mechanical machine to make horseshoes, the Civil War could not have happened. Likewise, in the carriage industry, people were making component parts. There were people that were making textiles for the upholstery for the seats. There were people that were mass producing wheels and axles at certain sizes. There were people that were mass producing body parts or bodies complete and would ship them around the country. Catalogs had codes for their telegraph. So you could order something over a telegraph using as few symbols as possible. In the back of the Peter Shuttler catalog, and Peter Shuttler was a manufacturer of work wagons, they had a whole list of different items: the size seat, the type of brake, the size wheels, how many body panels you wanted on the side for grain wagons. And so they had all this, and you type in, I want a grain wagon, and then H would say, this is the size wheels I want. P would say, this is the style brake I want. G would say, this is the size that I want it for a single horse or for a double horse. And it went straight down through there. So you didn't have to make this complete description of the vehicle. You just put these codes in, and it was telegraphed to the factory, and that's how you received your order. Amesbury, Massachusetts, they were producing 30,000 sleighs a year in some years. 30,000 sleighs a year in Amesbury, Massachusetts. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the horse-drawn industry, the number of people that are using sleighs. And you didn't buy a sleigh every year. So, there were hundreds of thousands of sleighs in the country. And likewise with buggies. So, but the reason I wanted to segue from the peddler's wagon to the oil delivery wagon, you can see there's a fill tank here. This is a compartment, a riveted compartment. There's a fill tank here. There's a riveted compartment. There's a fill tank there, and this end is riveted with this seat. And this is very common in these oil tankers, that the seat was, it was formed right into the front tank. So 1, 2, 3 tanks. This one's smaller. This one's the largest. This one's the middle. So you'd have lamp oil, you'd have stove oil, you'd have gasoline. And so now, and this is the Buxton oil delivery. This is not Buxton, Maine. It's the Buxton family. And this particular vehicle, it's not complete. It's sort of a mashup of other vehicles. In Damascotta, there's a 6-unit condo. It's actually in Newcastle. It says the Standard. And the reason it's named the Standard is because the building they tore down there was originally built for Standard Oil back in the horse-drawn days. So the oil would be delivered up the river, pumped into the building, and the Standard Oil building had oil delivery wagons and a stable. In Round Pond, there was a man who was selling some vehicles a few years back. So, he was selling vehicles, so I wanted to see what they were. I went down to see him. Somebody, called me and said, hey, there's vehicles for sale, horse-drawn vehicles for sale. So I went down to see him, and he took me in his house, and he says, my great-grandfather drove an oil delivery route. And he went from Round Pond he lived in Round Pond, but when he went on his route, he'd drive from Round Pond into Newcastle. He'd load up on oil, and then he'd drive to Waldoboro, to North Waldoboro, to Washington, to Whitefield, to Alna, to Wiscasset, back to Damariscotta. And it was like a 2-week route. And he would just drive that 2-week route, and then he'd come home for a week and, work around the farm, I guess. And then he'd head off on this 2-week route again. And that was his job. And I think that 2-week circuit would be about the circuit that you'd have. You had a horse, the horse needs rest. He can't drive forever. I drove the Oregon Trail in 2011 with my brother Rinker with 3 mules. We went 2,000 miles in 4 months, and we drive for 5 days, and then we take a day or 2 off. And then, so that's, we drove 8 hours a day pretty generally. And then every 4, 5, 6 days, we'd take a break for a day or 2. And the horses needed that. The horses, when we got to Oregon, I was particularly proud that people would, come and say, wow, I can't believe the shape these mules are in. And so I can only believe from that experience that the peddler, the oil delivery guy would have that same concern for his animals, that he'd want them to be in good shape. He's also a salesman. You don't want to show up with this beat to pulp nag and expect people to want to do business with you. They knew a big oak tree that they could camp under, and they also might have bartered, halfway through the trip. They might have bartered, in some cluster of places where they knew there were going to be, a cluster of farms or a little village there, in Washington or Whitefield or Waldoboro or one of these places, and they might have bartered in a rooming house. When I was a kid, and this is me, when I was a kid in New Jersey, we had a place in Morristown, New Jersey called the Market Street Mission. And it was a building in town, and they had bedrooms and a kitchen and some living rooms, and they housed young men. They weren't homeless, they stayed at the mission, but my father would go over to the Market Street Mission and get day laborers to come over and work on our place. I think in previous generations there were more accommodations for people to stay. A woman once told me that during the 30s, when the mobsters were going around, that it was not uncommon for men to come and say, hey, I'm looking for work. This is during the Depression. I'm looking for work. Is there something for her to do? And she said it was not uncommon for my mother to say, yes, sleep in the barn, I'll cook you a meal. These fences need to be mended. And that's a woman who was in her 70s, 80s when she told me that story. Even today, if you go out to the Midwest and you go into a restaurant, if you're single, they say, would you like to sit at the community table? And you get down and there's a table that sits 10, 12 people, and there's, there might be an elderly couple there might be a bachelor farmer sitting there. And coming back from the Oregon Trail trip, I drove back across country, and when I get into that situation, they said, would you like to, sit at the community table? I always took them up on it, because you'd always sit down and you could always strike up a conversation, or somebody would strike up a conversation with you. What are you doing? Where are you up to? And where are you going? And what do you do around here? And I won't say it's something we're missing, but it's something we should cultivate, that kind of, even in my own house, I've put up people for, I put up a girl once who was studying and needed a cheap place to stay. I put up another woman with a couple kids. She needed a place to stay for a year or so. And I think that we should make the lesson of the oil guy and the peddler, the rooming house, the community table. Lots of opportunity for us to cultivate that in our own lives today. This dump wagon spent its entire life on a farm off the Boston Post Road in Massachusetts. It's a New England dump wagon. It's kind of a colloquial vehicle. I did a talk recently at the Woodlawn Museum. If you get a chance to go to the Woodlawn Museum in Ellsworth, Maine, go. It's a wonderful museum. They have a small collection of carriages that are particular to that house. You know, the vehicles that were part of that estate, and they're all there. And some of them, was one of them, a coachee from the early 19th century that is a national treasure for the condition it's in. So if you get a chance, Woodlawn Museum, Ellsworth, Maine, go. Back to this dump wagon. The reason the Woodlawn Museum came up is they asked me to do a talk, and I put together a talk of all Maine vehicles. I wanted to just focus just on Maine. So I gathered up a bunch of photographs, all of Maine, and they wanted to talk on carriages. But when I gathered up this collection of photographs, there was about 60, 75 photographs of Maine. What I found is, much like today, Maine was then and still is today a working vehicle state. You know, you get down to New Jersey, you get down to, you know, Massachusetts, in close to Boston, or Washington, D.C., in close. You know, not everybody's driving a pickup truck. You come to Maine, you know, pickup trucks galore. It was the same way back then when I put together this photographic essay for vehicles in Maine. What I found were dump wagons. What I found were hay wagons. What I found were jigger wagons, which is another colloquial Maine wagon, big flatbed, low to the ground, stiff axle, no springs, for hauling potatoes, hauling rocks, hauling logs, hauling barrels. You know, it's just a flatbed work wagon. And so this is a dump wagon. It's a four-wheel dump wagon. There's this box right here will hold a yard of gravel, yard of dirt. If I put, there's stake pockets here, here, and here, and it's got the headboard here. So you can put another layer of boards up on this. So you can fit 2 yards of dirt in here. For an article I did for the museum newsletter, I figured out the tonnage of what a yard of dirt weighs, but it escapes me, but it's a lot. There's 2 pictures that I've uncovered. One is they're building a sardine cannery in Belfast, Maine, and there's about 8 dump wagons in that picture. And there were lighter dump wagons to this, and because the dump wagons came in different sizes, different size wheels, different size spokes, different size boxes. This is one of the bigger ones. Some of them you could take the front axle off, and they'd rest the front axle on a barrel, and then they'd fill the body with dirt. And so then they could be filled. It's because they're filling these things with shovels, and they're digging at the bank with picks. They're filling it with shovels, and then they're hauling it off to dump it in a hollow somewhere. And generally back in these days, and the same things today, they might have stockpiled dirt at a time, but they usually, listen, we're gonna dig for a sardine cannery over here. And the city would say, well, and the city was involved in that because they had to give a building permit even back then. The city says, well, what are you gonna do with all the dirt? And he says, well, I don't know. Well, we'd like to flatten this road out over here. And so, that dirt would get moved to some place where they, from hill to hollow, as I like to say. And to just be practical about it. Let's not move this stuff twice. Other parts of the country, they'll have 4-wheel dump carts like this, but the body has doors that open up and drop out so they can just dump it. This you sort of off center and put the majority of the load aft, and then there's right in here, there's just a big lever, and you pull a pin, do this, and the body just dumps and dumps it. So, so I uncovered this picture of about 8 dump wagons, and they're hauling the dump wagon away with a team, and then they'll haul another one in and take the team off of that and put it on another and haul it back and forth. It's no different from today. You got a dump truck guy, and he's got 3 or 4 dump trucks, and he gets a contract to build a road. It was the same way back then. The guy he had a couple dump carts, and I'll take the contract to build that road. And wow, that's a bigger job than I thought. I'm gonna hire, Joe the farmer over here has got a dump cart. I'm gonna hire him with a team, and several people around, the county will have dump carts, and he'd hire them. And then he realized, well, I don't need a team for every dump cart because we're gonna be loading them here, and it takes longer to load them than it does to dump them. So he'll hire somebody with a team in his dump cart, and then he'll haul all the dump, and they take the front axles off of them. It's just a pin, it pulls out. And so in this picture in Belfast particularly, there's about 8 dump carts backed up to the bank. There's about 20 men loading the dump carts. And there's a couple guys with teams, sitting there waiting for the dump carts to be filled. And there's another team coming in with a dump cart that had just been emptied. And as I like to point out when I get these photographs this photograph is of one section of what's going on. There's something going on off the photograph that we don't see, like the area where they're dumping the dirt. And so it's unknown, but it can be assumed that there's always the assumption that there's something else going on. And it's not an assumption, there is something else going on. It's getting dropped somewhere. And then the other photograph I found is of a paper mill in Millinocket being built. And there's about 30 dump carts in that, and about 100 men. And it's just, to me, it's amazing that to see that many dump carts in one picture. And then I have to take that, again, this is the assumption that goes with it. Every foundation in every old home in Maine got dug. They got dug by hand, and the dirt had to get hauled off. And maybe it got hauled off and just, filled a swale, 100, 200 yards away, but it had to get hauled off, and it was with one of these, or something very similar to that. And so you go down, if you own an antique home in Maine, with a stone foundation and a dirt floor, and there's a lot of them still around, go down in there and measure the size of your hole, measure how many yards, count how many wagon loads that a 1 yard or a 2 yard dump cart had to haul off to dig the foundation hole in your home. And look at an old picture of your town and imagine the road building. There's a great picture of dump carts that I found from 1920 building Route 1 in Brunswick. Horse-drawn dump carts, Route 1 in Brunswick. I found a picture of, in Augusta, of a CMP wagon. Central Maine Power stringing wires from a horse-drawn wagon in Augusta, 1900. It's not, and you can go on the CMP website and see that picture. Hannaford's. There's a picture in Portland of a Hannaford's with 4 Hannaford's wagons parked out front. These things, I've seen Wrigley Spearmint Gum wagons, I've seen Pepsi Cola wagons, I've seen armored meat wagons. Everybody knows the Budweiser wagons. The Pabst Blue Ribbon had a wagon. I owned a sleigh that I bought off of a farm in Lisbon that had a documented history of hauling butter into Lewiston. And when the farm got sold and the young son on the farm, I realized was getting into horses, I called his parents up and I said, listen, I got a butter sleigh that came off of your farm, and I think if you're gonna be having horses, you ought to have it back. And I gave it back to him. So 600 horses just to deliver newspapers. You know, I have a picture of 8 dump wagons and then another picture with like 30 dump wagons in it. Route 1's being built with it. You got CMP, you got Hannaford's, you got Budweiser, you got Pepsi, you got Pabst Blue Ribbon, you know, on infinitum. You know, there were millions of horses, millions of shoes, hundreds of thousands of wagons. This is the way the world worked. Well, we got this one listed as a box or resort wagon. It says Camp Ossipee on it. And it says Camp Ossipee on the back. It's got leather seats. It's what I would refer to as a platform wagon. And it's got, again, I pointed out on that yellow wicker ladies' phaeton that had platform springs on it. This has got a semi-platform springs. It's got 3 springs. It doesn't have a spring on the front, but it's got a spring on the side, elliptical springs, and a spring in the back, and it has the same on the front. And again, the wheels turn, and there's a rub iron here, and you can see this rub iron rolls. There's a flat rub iron that just is a stationary piece of metal, but they wear a groove and look unsightly. This way, the iron actually rolls and doesn't wear as much. But that's to keep this wheel, when it hits the rub iron, it keeps the body, it protects the body. And it also keeps, you can come around, the wheels of course roll in this way, you bring it around, it catches under the body, it has a tendency to want to flip the body over. And you got to think that at some point, just like dashboards, the first guy, you know, put 4 wheels on something and trotted off with his horse and got hit in the head with a rock and said, ooh, we got to invent a dashboard. We're going to put a board up there to keep those rocks from dashing us in the head. What are you going to call it? Oh, a dashboard. So the same thing I think happened with this rub iron. What happened? Well, the wheel was rubbing against the body and flipped us over. Well, we got to put a piece of iron to prevent that. What are we going to call it? A rub iron. So that fellow Eugene Swan that I talked about, that used to walk from West Hartford to Belgrade, when he was a camper, I once asked him, well, how'd you get up here when you were a camper? So you know, in the 30s he was walking, in the teens he was, you know, in the 20s, late 20s and 30s. Again, these estimates are estimates of time. But when he used to come up here, he said, I took a train. It was 4 trains, 4 different train companies. I took a train from West Hartford into Boston. I took a train from Boston to Portland. I took a train from Portland to Wiscasset. And then I took the Wiscasset-Waterville-Farmington Railway. Again, another great museum in Alna. If you haven't been there, go there. It's just, they're actually building from scratch a brand new locomotive. They got a roundhouse there. You can go for a train ride on about 6 miles of restored track. If you haven't been there, go. And then he said, when I got to North Belgrade Station, they'd come pick us up in a wagon and take us to camp. And this is it was a boys' camp. And when I see Camp Ossipee, it reminds me that it had to be a wagon similar to this. And this is what a platform wagon, a hotel wagon, a depot wagon, a resort wagon, they're all the same vehicle. Platform wagon, hotel wagon, depot wagon, resort wagon. They were all built for hauling many people from the railroad station to another destination. A lot of time the resort wagons were just to take people, you know, sightseeing. It's got curtains on the side that fall down for inclement weather. There are these little nails that look like thumbtacks, those plastic thumbtacks that they put down around here that you can snap the curtain down around. I don't see there are any on this vehicle. And so these were, you know, where there was a railroad station in town, there was probably 6 or 8 of these in town. You know, the hotel, each hotel would have one of these, like the hotels today have a minivan to take you to the airport. It's the same thing. And again, in the front here, I don't know if you can swing the camera, but this is what would come up, and there'd be a rain curtain to go over the driver's lap. It's got a foot brake, goes back to this that rubs on the tire to stop. This is well-used, original condition. The floorboards are worn. I built a wagon. I built a wagon in the 80s. I was in the sleigh ride business in New Hampshire, and one year we didn't have a lot of snow, so we went over to Bridgeton, and a guy had a couple of depot wagons like this. One they were smaller than this. One was a two-seater and one was a single-seater. But we took the two-seater, and I just painted it gray real quick because we were trying to make money, and I put it gray. I painted it with latex paint. It was cold, but it wasn't freezing. And the first load of people that walked off of there had gray backsides, because I just painted the seats, and we didn't have cushions on it. I just sort of kept my mouth shut and let them walk off. I took the $10. That summer, we took that wagon and I turned it into something that we could haul more people with, just in case. And one of my buddies took it over to New Hampshire and used it in the fall, leading up to the sleigh ride season. And I built this new body on it. I cut the front wheels down so we could make it cut under, and I really changed it all around. And I think I ended up driving that fall. I don't know how that worked out, but the first load of people that got in that wagon with me were wearing golf shoes, and they just shredded the floor of that wagon with these golf shoes without even thinking about it, And when I see how worn and scalloped off the floor is in this, I was just reminded of that. It bothers me less now that they did that, because it's a good story, and all things have, you don't patina something by not using it. And so something that has a history. I said earlier we were down in a farm and a couple weeks ago looking at a collection of big coaching vehicles, and they had a sleigh in there. And the woman that owned the collection said, well, the sleigh looked beautiful. It was brand new, looked brand new. And she said, this sleigh I had when I was a little girl, and I needed a pony sleigh, and this sleigh was too heavy for my pony, so I chopped it in half with a chainsaw and used it for a few winters like that. And fortunately, she's in her 70s now. Fortunately, she saved both pieces. And a few years ago, she sent it off to be restored. And so now it's in its original configuration. And I just love stories like that, I just love stories like that, because it's not about the finery of the Gilded Age. That's just the story of a love of a girl for her pony, and I want to go out and be free in a New England winter landscape. And my dad, when we were kids, I was only a year old, so it really didn't benefit me much, but he had a Carriage collection, and he took most of my older brothers, and I have 5 brothers and 5 sisters, and he took most of my older brothers and sisters on a covered wagon trip and followed Washington's trail from Morristown, New Jersey to Valley Forge. He got as far as Lancaster. He never got all the way to Valley Forge, but in the pictures we have of that, he had an alarm clock hanging from a string, and he had a rear view mirror. And he had a wooden leg, my dad did. And in one picture, you can see his pants hiked up and his wooden leg sticking out. And you wouldn't know that it's a wooden leg, but I do. And there's nothing fine about that picture. They're great, nice horses. They were good horses. It was a good harness. It was a nice wagon. But it was just a guy in love with his kids and wanted to take his kids on an extended vacation in a horse-drawn wagon. Imagine in this wagon here, Camp Ossipee. I don't know the Camp Ossipee. It seems like a camp to me, summer camp. And so imagine this wagon chock-a-block full of kids that are you know, excited to be away from home, excited to go sailing and canoeing and hiking in the Maine woods. You know, they're from New Jersey, they're from Boston, they're from Connecticut, and they're coming up to, you know, Ossipee, I'm assuming this is New Hampshire, not Maine. And they're coming up here, and you know, there's a guy in his 20s or 30s driving the wagon, and they're looking up to him like he's, you know, Nanook of the North. And you know, he's probably some camper turned counselor, you know, and turned buggy driver, you know, and that's the history that I find just fascinating. Is that there's the story behind this is not the data manufacturer, or the fact that it has the platform springs or the staggered spokes or the leather upholstery. We're not what you call it, a depot wagon or a hotel wagon. It's that there were kids that experienced their first time away from home sitting right there in that seat, you know. And some lucky kid got to sit up front with the driver and, you know, felt like king of the world. So, you know, and I think that's when I look around the room, you know, we have these, there's some beautifully restored vehicles to these country vehicles, to the knacker wagon or the peddler's wagon or the dump cart, but they all had, you know, a personal story. They all had a history. This vehicle we're looking here, 1828. This is another vehicle that came from the Carriage Museum of America. Again, the accent on the dish of this is greater than on a newer vehicle in the 19th century, but it's not as accented as that wagon from 1768. This has staggered spokes on the wheels. It has something that's a little bit different. It has a slice in the hub here, and instead of having a nut that holds the wheel on, it has a linchpin. And of course, the linchpin's got a hole in it, so you can put another pin in it so the wheel can't come out. This has got, it's got a steel skine on it's a wooden axle with this piece is like a big lag bolt that goes into the wooden axle. And this, you know, a handmade threads on that. And then it has what's called the linchpin. And that's you know, it's before they had nuts. For axle nuts, they had that. Interestingly enough, most comfort wagons are single horse. This is a team, made for a team. 1828, 1776. So 28 and 24, 52 years. The country was 52 years old, you know. So there were people alive that fought in the Revolution. This is a very young country. This is Governor John Dix, young John Dix. He just mustered out of the Army. He was a young lawyer. He got married that year. It's a comfort wagon, which is an early American vehicle. It was made for comfort. There was a second seat in it. There's the holes in it for the second seat, but we don't have the second seat. The cushion on the seat here is from the second seat. So the second seat, which is much smaller than the seat you see there. Very common to have a painted canvas in those days. Again, the top breaks down and folds back. It was probably not painted black. The paint's too good for it to be original, and it's too black to be original. A lot of vehicles from this period were very bright color. If you ever get a chance, I speak about this a lot when I'm in the museum docent, is if you ever get a chance to go to the Macmillan House that's attached to the Portland Museum of Art, take it. You just go through the Portland Museum of Art, and it's just the Macmillan House is past this marble sculpture gallery, and there's really bright colors. The floor coverings, the wallpaper paint or wallpaper dressings of the paint in rooms are very bright and vibrant, almost neon. And that's not uncommon for the period. You know, they just, that was the style of the day. It's something you see often on vehicles of this era. Not so much that English vehicle had it, but there's no step on the right side. For those of you who are equestrians, you know, you always get on a horse from the left side. I think that carried into vehicles of this era. There's a step on the left side, there's none on the right side. And we have some New England pleasure wagons and some gigs from this period, and only steps on the left side. So that it's just something, you know, just before these vehicles were built. If you go I wish I had this, and I wish I could find it again. I read an article once on the tax records for Philadelphia, and 1810, the vehicles, and I'm paraphrasing these numbers. 1810 vehicles can be numbered in the tens of, you know, four-wheel vehicles, tens of two-wheel vehicles, tens of sleighs, you know, fewer than 100 vehicles in the whole city of Philadelphia. 1830s, they're numbered in the hundreds. 1860s, they're numbered in the thousands. So you can, so extrapolating from those numbers backwards, a few decades before this was built, most people were walking. So, but I'd like to paint the picture of this young, freshly married lawyer, wealthy man to have this built, even wealthier because he's got a team of horses in front of it instead of a single horse, going through, you know, the Hudson Valley in New York, you know, like the Hudson River School of Painting. You can imagine one of those paintings with this guy and his young wife, and you know, the world, you know, all the promise of the world and his new family ahead of him. And what were the conversations going on? You know, it's the 1820s. What's he talking about then? This guy's a lawyer with his young wife, and he's clearly in the upper crust of society. In the 1870s, he becomes governor of New York, Governor Dix, Governor John Dix. Governor of the state of New York, yeah, Honorable John A. Dix, John Adams Dix. So this is what we're looking at here, is a roof seat brake. Now, brake is a term, you have skeleton brakes, you have a coach that's called a brake. It's just a skeleton brake is actually for braking horses, for training horses. And a skeleton brake would have a gear like a set of wheels and springs like this, a fifth wheel like this, and a driver's seat. But then the rest of it would be skeletonized. There would be no body, none of these other seats. And it'd just be basically in some cases, just a board that connects the front axle to the rear axle. And then on the rear axle, they'll have a box about foot wide, 10 inches thick, 10 inches tall, bolted to the rear axle full of lead to provide the weight of the body. So a brake is is a term that's been it's used for breaking horses, I think is where it derives. But then this one has a roof, you know, and then the seats are on the roof, so it's a roof seat brake. And you could fit 4, 8, 12, a couple people up front. So, you know, this is a 10, well, it's a 12, 14, 16 passenger brake. This one is from the Sugar Hill Hotel. You can see the monogram on the side, the Sugar Hill, and there's 2 H's in that monogram, Sugar Hill Hotel, in New Hampshire. And this is, there's a lot of pictures of Concord coaches with people all over the top. And of course, the White Mountains were just like the Hudson Valley, the Adirondacks. They were tourist destinations in the summertime. People wanted to go up and, you know, rusticators, go up into the mountains. And some people had homes there. Some people would just go up there, stay in hotels. There's the Eagle Mountain House in Jackson, New Hampshire is one of the remnants from that. The Mount Washington House is a remnant from that. The Wentworth Hotel in Jackson, New Hampshire. The Eagle Mountain House is in Jackson. Those are all, you know, remnants of this era, of this period in time. And this particular vehicle was used, again, for hauling people from the train station to the hotel, but then it would also take people on outings and touring to go out and see the views of the mountains. It's got a brake. This brake is different from a lot of the brakes we have in the museum. I haven't said a lot about brakes, but this brake has a wheel, but there's a mechanism comes down. So this runs a gear that turns a screw, something that rides on that screw pulls another belt crank, which pulls and puts levers on this. And the nice thing about that is that I can put, like you can on your car, it's not a full stop. I can just put pressure on here. So when I'm going down a hill, I'm taking the weight off the horses, not off their shoulders, but off their backsides, off their britchin. As you're driving the wagon, you know, you're going uphill or on the level, you didn't need the brake. But as you're coming to as you're cresting over to come to a downhill, you start to feed it in. And there's a strap that goes around a horse's butt that hooks to the pole. And that's how horses hold vehicles back. It's called a britchin. It's where we come from the term for breeches. Britchin. And this 6 horses. So you have a set of you got a set of whiffletrees here and a pole that's underneath, not that pole, that pole. So the horses are hooked to this whiffletree. So there's a set of about 10 foot per horse. You have that pole that sets in here, goes forward. Then there's a cable that's in here that hooks into where the pole hooks into, right down under here. And then it goes all the way forward between the first set of team and there's another set of lead bars. And it goes forward through the second team. So there's 6 horses all in this thing together. So from beginning to end, this is about a 40, 50 foot rig. It's a long, long rig to drive. The driver's got 6 reins in his hands. There's a 4-in-hand saying that means you have 4 reins in your left hand. And there's a special way that the leader's reins come across here. You know, the left rein goes first, then the right rein goes to the next finger. Then the lead rein for the second horse comes underneath and up over here. And it's a whole rigmarole for how you hold them. This is all original paint. It is a sporting vehicle, but it's a crossover. It's a sporting coaching vehicle. And I'm assuming that this Sugar Hill Hotel, I'm just assuming that he wanted a fancy sporting vehicle to do tours in. And because this vehicle is a lot more expensive than that Camp Ossipee wagon that we talked about earlier. So, and I mean, in a factor of 10, you know. So, but again, it's a valuable vehicle in today's market, even in the condition it's in. Some would say more so because of the condition it's in. We're really lucky to have it. Again, you know, you see these on the road at coaching meets, but they're, you know, when you figure, all right, I got to have 6 horses, then I got to have 6 harnesses, then I got to have a truck to haul the wagon, a truck to haul the horses. You know, money to put all those people up at a hotel. When you see one of these at a show, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars behind that vehicle to get it into show condition and to outfit it. And some of those big coaches, they'll have in the rear boot, they'll have special picnic tables made to fold and go into these. They'll have special mahogany boxes that when you pull out, they're full of lunch and full of wine and full of whatever. A lot of these vehicles that have this has true louvers, and it's not in the sporting world or in hunting vehicles. It's not uncommon that when you see a vehicle with true louvers, that they had hunting dogs underneath of them. I don't think that was the case with this vehicle. But I can imagine people going on an outing like this that they probably did, you know, take, you know, wine and lunches for people, you know, from the hotel. And I don't know how it worked, but can you imagine if you're on vacation and say, well, do you want to do the mountain tour? And they say, oh, I'd love to do the mountain tour. Would you like lunch with that? Oh yeah, I'd love to do one. Okay, well, we'll charge that to your room. I can't imagine it was any different back in that day. This was an expensive vehicle to buy, to outfit, and to run. And if you wanted to take advantage of that, I'm sure it was an upcharge. So this vehicle to my left here is called a Bronson wagon. And it's a sporting vehicle. It's natural wood, so it's a summertime vehicle. It could be used for a hunting vehicle. It can be used for an outing vehicle. It's generally they're very sought after. This particular one's a Brewster, and the Brewster name in carriages is synonymous with quality. The Rolls Royces that were built in the United States all had Brewster bodies on them. So Rolls Royce, when they decided to sell cars in the United States, they contracted with Brewster to put the bodies on. So that is an indication of the quality of the vehicle. They're probably the premier carriage builder in the United States. There's definitely today the most sought after vehicle manufacturer. There's people out there that have vast collections of just Brewster vehicles. They're very, finely built, and they go from this to road coaches. It's a vast variety of vehicles. The records ended up being donated, I think, to the New York Metropolitan Museum. And so you can today get a hold of the Carriage Association of America if you have a Brewster vehicle, and they all have a serial number that's on the front seat rail, a 5-digit number, and you can call the Carriage Association of America, and they can tell you the history of your vehicle. They can tell you the date it was manufactured, the date it was ordered, the color it came in, the options that it had, whether it had rubber tires or steel tires. It'll tell you the color of the vehicle, it'll tell you the color of the pinstriping, it'll tell you the color of the upholstery. Very detailed records, all handwritten, and all I don't know if they've all been digitized yet, but somebody worked for 20 years and is still working at digitizing all the records from the Brewster Company. So that's another, what's the term? You know, another thing that attracts people to this is that you can really, you know, you can establish the provenance of the vehicle at its origin without a doubt. So again, it's got the cut under body, but the wheel just does not fit under it. So the cut under is really it allows, even though this body is cut under and the top of the wheel will not go under the body, it will go further under the body than it would if the body ran straight across at that lower level. So it's just a really fine example of a really fine wagon. It's a simple wagon. It's not it's a summertime outing vehicle and it has a wooden dashboard on it. And some of these came in very highly figured work. I've seen them in I can't say that I've seen Brewsters in bird's eye maple, but I have seen these outing wagons, this Bronson style outing wagon in bird's eye maple, tiger maple. You know, some of them come in a really full figured wood. So again, I think we might have another one still in our collection. We've had several of these. They're a very popular vehicle for the summertime. They made them in a beach wagon that would have a wider wheel for operating on the sand. It's so fun. It's got the canvas top, and you can see the canvas is brown. It's not black. The harness of this horse that we have displayed with it is a black harness. Very rarely would you see a natural vehicle with black harness. If you have a natural vehicle, you drive with a russet harness, which is just more of a red, a raw leather colored harness. It's fun to sit next to it. They're just, all of these vehicles, they're just really nice objects. That idea of art and engineering, this intersection of art and engineering, and how close they intersect here in the carriage world is, there's art, there's engineering, there's craftsmanship, there's, this one's even got the original upholstery on it. You can see this sort of leopard style fabric print. So back in the day, the textile industry was it was roaring along at this point. So there's materials that we have today. So they were building, like I said, Amesbury, Massachusetts, they built 30,000 sleighs a year. And so I'll go back again to that 600 horses and the deliver newspapers in New York City. And just those two things were the horseshoe machine that got invented just before the Civil War. All of those things indicate the numbers that were involved in this. And so today, when we're restoring a vehicle or we're trying to find materials for a vehicle, a lot of it we just can't find because it's not available because nobody's building these things by the thousands anymore. And you can find it in some places in Europe or facsimiles of the material in Europe. And so when you see a vehicle that's been restored and that has been restored accurately, there's just a tremendous amount of research and scouring the internet, you know, talking to people, finding this material or finding the craftsman that can do it. It's just it's just, you know, the deeper you get to delve into it, as I've been able to, the more and more you realize that you can only ever scratch the surface of what you need to know about the subject. Okay, so what we're looking at here is an Albany cutter. It's a 2-seat Albany cutter. And what denotes this as an Albany cutter as opposed to a Portland cutter or a gentleman's sleigh or a pung. You know, there's a lot of different words for sleigh. What is the shape? This has got a really nicely curved dash. It's got this swell body shape where if you were a boat builder, you'd call it tumble home, where there's a lot of form to the sides. There's a very, you know, sweeping back to it. You know, it's high style is what it is. There's no other reason for it to have all these forms than just for style. It's got these little eagle heads on it, which are common on all sleighs. The paint this has this yellow front to the dash. It's black on the back. It's got green striping. It's got red striping. It's got these, you know, corner stripes. It's got, you know, there's a B in here. So there's, you know, this was Bozo's sleigh. You know, somebody's name is on there. It's got this is metal, this shape here, you know, and these are all high. So there's a form for this piece. 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 This is sawn out. The sides have a form. The back has a form. Actually, the body was built upside down on a form and then taken off a form. The runners were built separately. You know, this was steam bent, this was steam bent. They were put on a jig, put together, and then the body was married to the runner's set. The sleigh I bought, the 1820, is sort of the great-grandfather to this sleigh. I call the sleigh that I bought a Hudson Valley sleigh. And this is generally referred to as an Albany sleigh. Now, there's a Portland cutter that was developed here in Maine by this carriage builder named Kimball. And it's a much more practical vehicle, you know. It's got form and it's got shape and it's got style and it's well constructed. But it's got nowhere near the form that this does, or you know, it would not be painted very colorfully. These were painted very colorfully, a high gloss paint, a thick paint job. And again, it's like one of the other vehicles I was talking about, more to be seen in than to get to where you're going. You know, these were, you know, a Curry and Ives type of vehicle where you were parading around town. This is more of an in-town vehicle than a cross-country vehicle. And another thing that has to be understood about the winter season, especially here in New England, where a lot of us are farmers, or were farmers, you know, your wood's all in by December. Your livestock still has to be tended to, but a lot of times the livestock's, you know, it's not out to pasture, or if it's in paddocks, they're close to the barns, and so they can get put inside if the weather turns inclement. The horse is the same thing, they're inside, you know, in the summer season, the cattle are, you know, put on pasture, and they might be put on pasture away from the house because the grass is green there. And so in the summertime and fall and spring, your life is expanded geographically. In the wintertime, you know, with our big connected buildings, everything moved closer in. You know, it simplified life to a certain extent. Plus, you didn't have field work to do. You know, if you were a farmer, you were probably cutting wood in the wintertime, but you were cutting next year's wood. So nothing was urgent that had to be done. You know, the crops didn't need to be tended because the ground was frozen. The cattle, you were just feeding them hay. They were, like I said, they were in close. So you had time to go visiting. The roads weren't muddy. The roads were rolled, or I can't imagine the roads, you know, Yarmouth, North Yarmouth would roll their roads. Did the road get rolled all the way into Yarmouth from North Yarmouth? I don't know. I suppose it got mowed to a certain point, and then it didn't. A lot of, in early England, and I can't imagine, well, so where I live in Newcastle, we have Damerscott Lake. And in the wintertime, Damerscott Lake is 13 miles long. In the wintertime, when it froze, Damerscott Lake was the highway from Jefferson into Damerscott Mills. That was how people got there. You got a 12-mile-an-hour horse on a 13-mile-long ice lake. You've done that 13 miles in an hour. You couldn't do that in the summertime. The roads were rutted, the roads were muddy, the roads were dry and lumpy and dusty. You know, it was not, so wintertime was a time for visiting. You didn't have work, or work wasn't as urgent, and your larder was full, and the road, the transportation was easier. We had bells on, these are saddle bells, you know, they'd wrap right around they're not saddle bells as such, but they're girth bells. They'd wrap around, the bigger bells would be on top of the horse. And the snow quieted things down. So you had the bells to let people know you were coming. So if you're on a narrow road, you could hear his bells, he could hear your bells. We got saddle bells here that sat on the top of the saddle here. And the same thing, you could hear them coming. Back in the freighting days, in the 18th century, on the Conestoga wagons, they had bells. So these are Conestoga wagon bells. If you've ever heard the term come home with your bells on, it's bells just like these. So the Conestoga wagons were freight wagons. They were from the late 17th century all the way through the mid 18th century. They didn't cross the Oregon Trail. I'm not saying never did a Conestoga wagon cross the Oregon Trail. I am saying they were not built for the Oregon Trail. They were freighting wagons. They hauled tobacco. They hauled grains. They hauled goods. They basically operated from Philadelphia down into Virginia. They hauled Philadelphia out as far west as Pittsburgh, I think. They're German in origin. You know, Pennsylvania Dutch, the German settlers. So watch your P's and Q's. Your mother ever tell you to watch your P's and Q's? So in the Conestoga wagon days, when you were on the wagon, meaning you were driving a Conestoga wagon, when you got to a tavern that's where the Conestoga wagon guys would go in and get a bite to eat and maybe have a beer or two. The bartender on the wall had a chalkboard and he'd put your name on the chalkboard because you were on the wagon. And then he'd have a row of P's and a row of Q's, pints and quarts. So if you were on the wagon, you were only allowed to drink so many pints and quarts. And if you drank too many pints and quarts, they didn't want you driving. So why my mother ever told me when I was 10 to watch my P's and Q's, I will have no idea. But that's the origin of that term. Stogie, a little cigar. They hauled tobacco on those Conestoga wagons, and the drivers would grab a fistful of tobacco and roll up the leaves into a little cigar they called a stogie. So when you jump into the car and say, hey, I want a shotgun. Well, the shotgun comes from the stagecoach days. Not so much in the East, but I wouldn't imagine. We had stagecoaches in the East. As a matter of fact, most of the stagecoaches were built in New Hampshire. You know, Abbott and Downing built the stagecoaches, and those stagecoaches, there's a famous picture of about 30 stagecoaches and harnesses enough for harnesses for those 30 stagecoaches, all sold to Wells Fargo on a train heading west. And so the stagecoaches were built in New Hampshire and then shipped west on train, which is an interesting thing. You know, the people think, well, the advent of the train, you know, marked the end of the horse-drawn era. It's exactly the opposite. Once we got the trains, there were large numbers of people who would show up to an area and they're stuck there unless they had a way to get to the next destination. And there were no tracks to get there, so they got there by stagecoach. So the advent of the train exploded the horse-drawn carriage industry, probably for a good 40 years. So it really wasn't until the introduction of the internal combustion engine that the company started, you know, to migrate to. And Studebaker built horse-drawn carriages long before they ever built automobiles. Brewster built horse-drawn carriages long before they ever started putting bodies on Rolls Royces. So the shotgun, you get back to the shotgun, so the guy would ride shotgun, and he wasn't riding shotgun to protect the covered wagon from Indians. He was protecting the mail. He was protecting the payrolls that would travel on these vehicles. And so you had the driver of the stagecoach, and then his right-hand man, the guy they called shotgun. And he kept the shotgun on there for bandits. Yeah, there's the origin of the shotgun. The word, you know, when you jump in the car and say, I'm riding shotgun, that's where that comes from. And so I'm going to show you something else to do with sleighs here. This is a foot warmer. And, you know, you used to be able to get these things for $5 at a flea market or yard sale. And you used to get charcoal would come like this shape like this, and this shape. And then you put it in here. So the charcoal would come in a shape that would fit that rectangular shape. You get it going, you stick it in here, and you put this thing under your lap robe. And it actually burns quite clean. You don't get smoked out. You're in a sleigh, you're in a vehicle, you know, they're drafty. I got a friend of mine, an Amish friend of mine, that lives up in Whitefield, and I got him one of those. And he says it'll burn for 12 hours. It'll keep you warm for 12 hours. And he says, I show up at Sunday meeting with that in the wintertime. And everybody in the vehicles, we put it under our robe and put it up against us. And then there's a hole between the, you know, under the seats. and they fashioned another robe for the kids in the back, so that there's this warm air underneath that comes underneath there. The kids can put their hands underneath the wool, and he says, we show up to Sunday church with rosy cheeks and warm kids. And all the other Amishmen, where'd you get that? Where'd you get that? And he just puts just regular charcoal briquettes in it. So we segued from foot warmers from sleighs to Conestoga wagons to bells to shotgun to back to foot warmers. So we got this collection of foot warmers here. There's half a dozen here. There's this monster here that would probably be big in a big enclosed coach. We have also these seats here that these are a children's seat, and you unfold that and put it right by your thigh, so your thigh would sit in here and the other person's thigh would sit in there, and you could put a little kid to sit between you in the sleigh. Same thing here. This is a little adjustable seat you could put on the floor in the back so a little kid could sit between everybody else. And here's an often, or not so often, if you focus down here on the floor, these are called horse anchors. You have a leather strap with a clip into the horse's halter, and then the other set of the strap would go wrap around the horse anchor. So you could pull up to some place and didn't have a hitching post and put this strap and then toss out the anchor, and your horse would be somewhat tethered. I had a mule of mine run off with one of those, and I still haven't found the damn thing. The leather strap broke. That thing's in some stone wall somewhere. So they're a good thing, but they're not perfect. There's a great old Mickey Rooney movie where he pulls up to his girlfriend's house in a Model A, and first thing he does is toss out a horse anchor, and it's tied to the mirror of the Model A. And there's not many people that would understand that, but Mickey Rooney did. I do. And now if you ever see that old Mickey Rooney movie, you'll know what it is that he tosses out. This horse leg, people see these all the time and have no idea what they're looking at. They're not all shaped like horse legs. These are real rare. But if you ever go up to a building and you see there's a garage door and then there's this big bullet-shaped granite piece at the base of the garage doors, they're curbstones, and they're the reason you see them a lot in old firehouses, and what they're for is as the wagon pulls out, if the wheel of the wagon hits here, it kicks it to the side, so the hub of the wagon doesn't hit the side of the garage door or the firehouse door. This whole collection, we came with the wagon jacks and the hitching posts and the whips and the horse anchors and the seats. We bought that whole collection intact from a guy who he'd made this collection and then offered it to us. Well, thanks for coming along on our little walk about the museum. If you'd like to come, we're located in North Yarmouth, 95 The Lane in North Yarmouth, Maine. And info@skyline.farm is a good way to get information on the internet. We're an all-volunteer organization, so we really don't have an active phone number, but you can get a hold of us through that website, and we will open the museum for on special occasions or for groups, or if you just can't get to us on Sunday afternoons when we're open from 1 to 4 every Sunday. And we do rotate our exhibit a couple times a year, and there's always a knowledgeable docent at the museum. Thank you, and thanks for coming.